everyone, and welcome back to Conscious Caregiving with L&L, where we're tackling the tough conversations. Today's topic is seniors and scams. Welcome, everyone. We have a wonderful panel here who is going to be providing resources and important discussion on this issue. We want to start first, though, by having the panel introduce themselves, and I will first start with Grace Whiting.
Thank you so much. It is an honor to be here. I'm excited to talk about this important topic. This is something that's near and dear to my heart. I've spent a little over a decade in the Washington, D.C. area working in caregiving, aging, and disability work, most recently as CEO of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys. And I spent several years at the National Alliance for Caregiving as their president and CEO, in addition to doing some work in Alzheimer's and around home healthcare. So it's such a great topic, and I appreciate the work y'all are doing for people who are living with dementia and their friends and family. And I'm glad that we have time today for this conversation.
Thank you so much, Grace, and we're honored to have you with us. Detective Ryan Weber.
Hello, my name is Ryan Weber. I'm a police officer with the Roseville Police Department. I've been an officer with Roseville for about 10 years now, and currently assigned as a detective for the past 3 years as a fraud and forgery detective. I'm particularly passionate about this topic of scams affecting our elderly population, and I appreciate the invite today.
Thank you for your time today. Mr. Jay Hapala.
Hello, thanks, Lance, and hello to everybody. I work for AARP here in Minnesota. Nationwide, we are a membership association for millions of people over the age of 50. We do our legislative advocacy work and run a number of education programs. And when it comes to fraud and identity theft, and when we survey our members and ask them about their concerns and their interest, financial crime and staying safe from them is always at the top of the list. So here in Minnesota, I work with our volunteers and law enforcement agencies and fraud investigators, and our goal is to educate people about the scams that we see. We know from our research that when someone is aware of a scam, they're much less likely to get into a conversation with a criminal and a con artist, and much less likely to lose any money to it. So that's where we focus.
Well, thank you for your advocacy and the work that the AARP are doing. Mr. Ken Whalen.
Hi, so great to see everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I'm here to share a bit about our family's nearly 14-year journey. We call it walking the path with our mother's early onset dementia. So happy to be here and, hopefully turn some wounds into wisdom for other people. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Mr. Jeffrey Bolglum.
Hello, Jeff Borglum with Techie Dudes. I own a small IT shop. We have a couple of locations where we take care of folks' computers that may be infected and have issues to clean them up and make them safe to use again. So we see all too many occurrences of seniors bringing in computers where they've been hit with scams, and gladly participate in this conversation today to help avoid anyone that we can to fall victim to those scams.
It's an important service, too. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. Mr. John Sweeney.
Hi, my name is John Sweeney. I was married for almost 72 years to my wife, Virginia, whom I lost almost 2 years ago to dementia. In my 94 years, I have faced a few scams, witnessed a few scams, so I'm vitally interested in this topic. And in recent months have had a couple that have hit very close to home with friends of mine. And so I'm very interested in this topic.
Well, thank you so much, and sorry for your loss. My esteemed, renowned co-host, Miss Lori LeBay.
Well, I am thrilled to be partnering with Lance for these conversations. Every single time I learn so much from everyone. My background is I have Alzheimer's Speaks, which is an advocacy-based media group trying to raise awareness and make connections. And this is just another wonderful added bonus working with Lance on this. So I can't wait to find out what I'm going to learn today.
Thank you, as always, Lori. I want to start the conversation with Grace. And Grace, researchers have found that seniors who are lonely are more vulnerable to scams. Dementia and Alzheimer's in particular can also be very isolating for the person living with dementia and their care partners. What can we do to help alleviate some of that isolation?
It's Excellent question. And it's a big issue. It's something that we see people around the world starting to talk about, not just for older adults, but people of all ages. So I think the United Kingdom really led the way when they appointed a minister for loneliness. But we've seen here in the US, the CDC and other public health professionals talking about how lonely we are just as a society and what the impact is on our ability then to take care of our own health and well-being, whether that's physical health, mental health, or financial health. A couple of things that are really important, especially if we're thinking from the perspective of someone who's trying to help an older adult in their life that may have some cognitive impairment. I think the first is it's always important to balance that autonomy with what that person wants and needs with their protecting them. And that can be really challenging sometimes. So, dad may suddenly has found the love of his life and he's ready to get remarried. And as an adult child, you may be feeling really nervous about that. And there's always this tension between respecting the autonomy of an older adult, even somebody that may have some cognitive impairment, with being able to protect them from scams and financial exploitation. This is where I think there are community-based resources that can be really helpful. One of my absolute favorites is the network of area agencies on aging and the umbrella organization, which used to be called the National Association of Area Agencies on Aging and is now called US Aging. That group has an initiative called Engaged, which is all about helping alleviate isolation among seniors, helping folks get connected to their community, get re-engaged in the workforce if they want to do that, develop relationships with each other through social and home and community-based programs. And I think really looking for those types of programs are a great place to start. And in many cases, I know from a caregiving lens, sometimes, especially if you're caring for an older adult, they are independent. They've been alive longer than you in many cases, and they know what they're doing, and they don't necessarily want your advice. And there are things that your peers can say to you, or you can observe in your peers, that sometimes is more persuasive than it would be coming from an adult child. So I think having that peer-to-peer interaction and finding some of those places where people can be together with their colleagues and people in their same age band can be really helpful in alleviating some of the isolation, as well as intergenerational setup. So maybe it's the grandkids are coming over, home from college once a month and spending time with their grandparents, or maybe it's volunteering in the community somehow. Those types of relationships can offset some of the social isolation, even if they're not, ride or die friends, even if they're just friends or acquaintances that that you see on a regular basis. So I would say that starting at that home and community-based service level is really important for beginning to address some of the isolation that many of us are feeling, especially after the COVID pandemic.
Right. And I just want to follow up. I agree with you. With our professional business, families will say, well, we can never get mom to clean out this closet, or we can never get dad to agree to let us help shower him. Some of it goes just to their own integrity, because you have a child now almost kind of changing roles and they're becoming the parent. And so they resent that and they're embarrassed by that. And that's understandable. But then we'll send in staff into that home, and their first try, they're getting that parent to do what the family's been trying to do for years. I feel for the family, but at the same time, the family just wants what's best for their parent or their loved one. They don't care how it happens, as long as they're safe and taken care of. So that's absolutely true. Peers and these community-based services can be huge difference makers. Let's talk about how professionals like bankers and lawyers, though, could help protect older adults from scams and from issues that they may be encountering. Because I know Lori and I, in preparation to our panel joining us today, we were talking about, just the risk associated with a loved one going into the bank, maybe a little confused, and they're immediately targeted. And maybe Detective Weber will touch on this later. They could put a huge bullseye on their back. You see this elderly person going in the bank, coming out with an envelope, and obviously they're counting their money, putting it in their purse, and the wrong person at the wrong time sees them and they're alone, and they decide to follow them or things like that, how can professionals like our bankers and lawyers help protect our older population?
So there's been some interesting developments, especially when we think about the role of regulation or government in helping to protect older adults. One is in the financial sector in particular, there have been regulations passed in the last 5 to 10 years that are intended to protect people with dementia. So the person who is advising someone as their finances is asked to really be observant about someone's cognitive impairment or a decline in cognition. So maybe you've worked with this client for 20 years and now all of a sudden they're having difficulty balancing their checkbook. That's something that many banks now provide training on in order to comply with the federal regulations around this. And some companies like Bank of America and Wells Fargo have actually taken on older adults as an initiative and really started to try to better understand how to serve those folks and create a more dementia-friendly community. So that's one piece of this, is that I do think financial professionals, as of today, are being trained on these issues. And so that's something where a friend or family member, if you go with someone to that financial appointment, they can help sort of ask those questions with their banker. Lawyers, I think, and don't hold it against me, I am a lawyer. We're not all terrible. Lawyers have a very important role to play. And one thing I would say that lawyers can really do is they can help you plan for what happens. So, having those conversations really early about how do I protect my assets? How do I protect my legacy? So that I can determine what happens to the wealth or what I've built over the course of my life. It could also be even families where maybe I have an adult child that has a disability and I'm getting older and I want to make sure I can provide for them. So having early conversations with an attorney that has a background in elder law or has a background in special needs planning can be very helpful in both protecting your assets if something happens to you or you lose your ability to make decisions, whether short-term or long-term, and just to help you facilitate conversations about, what your intentions are. And I think that's part of it too, is there's this, sort of John Grisham-esque, like we're all going to be around the videotape and everyone's disinherited and there's a big mystery. It doesn't have to be like that. You can have conversations frequently with your family about this is what I want my life to look like when I get to this stage. And by having those conversations and putting some of that into planning documents, you can really save a lot of heartache and potentially avoid, tax consequences or other financial downsides that happen when you don't have time to plan or you don't set aside time to plan.
Real quick, Grace, I want to follow up too on the loneliness aspect of being more vulnerable or susceptible to scams. What, in your professional opinion, what is the connection between the increased risk for seniors that dealing with isolation and loneliness to being victims or falling prey to scams?
One that comes to mind very frequently is sort of remarriage and romance. And, I think one of the wonderful things about modern medicine and just where we are as a society is that, you can find love at any age. That is wonderful. I think where things become complicated is when we start to say, okay, now we're getting remarried. Maybe we're remarrying and somebody might end up having long-term care needs and might have to become eligible for Medicaid. And so there's an incentive there to try to bring in new assets into a household in order to cover the very real cost of long-term care. So I think that's one piece of it, is that there's a lot of challenges around protecting someone who's older. And you also see that play out in sort of these contested guardianship cases that we've seen over the news. As a Star Trek fan, I've followed the Nichelle Nichols guardianship debate. And that was a situation where Nichelle Nichols had this whole plan laid out. She found love late in life. She also developed cognitive impairment. And so you had this sort of battle essentially between her adult son, who hadn't really been around for a lot of her life and said, no, this is what mom wants, and her new husband, and what would happen with the assets. And, from an outside perspective, it's really hard to know, like, what really happened here. Is this person being exploited or not? And that's where I think coming back to the loneliness, that entire conversation might have been different if her son had been in touch and they'd had a stronger relationship going in. It could have been a situation where they were able to bring this new person into the family and welcome them, or the son was able to raise concerns much sooner than before they got married. And so I think that's part of that is, there's a protective effect of having those strong social relationships so that when you do get to the crisis moment, it's not the first time you're raising a concern.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that. Before I turn it to Lori, I just want to mention again, we have some wonderful resources that are going to be on the website as well in the show notes. And one of them that our friends at the FBI provided was a link to their spotting a romance scam to, help protect people and make them aware of it. And we can touch on that later on. But thank you so much, Grace, for providing that helpful information. Lori?
Well, I just think that was a really important piece on that vulnerability, because I've also experienced a lot of people that I work where they're lonely and strangers are approaching them for money, and they're just much more, when they don't have those social connections. So thank you for bringing that up. I am going to talk with Detective Weber because I just think you've got to be filled and see so much, of these scams. But one of the most important things I think to start with is there's a lot of stigma about being scammed. And so I think for a lot of people, it's hard for them to pick up the phone and go, help, what do I do? Because they're so embarrassed. Do you see that a lot? Because I want to talk about when people should actually reach out and approach and start telling family or police or whoever.
Yeah, very, very good question. And I guess the short answer is yes, I do see that a lot. I hear that a lot from the scam victims that I speak to, of them feeling embarrassed that they fell victim to a certain scam. And I can touch more on that later, but I get to answer the other part of your question of how do you tell, or how do you know when you should call the police if you feel like you've been part of a scam? And things that I always tell people is if someone is contacting you that you don't know, that you've never met, and it's over the phone or over the internet, and they are asking for money, or they are making threats that you need to send this money, or claims of lottery winnings, or whatever the case may be involving money, that's a red flag, and your local police department would want to know about that. Certainly, if you've sustained any kind of monetary loss in regards to a scam, that's something you should call your police department. If you're concerned that maybe someone has your identity, or that you provided your identity to someone that you feel that they shouldn't have, give your police department a call. There's things that we can do and recommend to help stop further monetary loss, or mitigate additional loss. Other things that I mentioned is if anyone asks you for gift cards, to pay them in gift cards, so often that we see that as a form of payment. It's very, very hard to track the use of gift cards and who the actual suspect is behind it. So if when I make presentations to people and I tell them, if the words gift cards come out, it's a scam. In today's day and age, if cryptocurrency is involved and someone's telling you that you have to make a cryptocurrency transfer, it's a scam. If something feels off, it's not sitting well with you, it's likely a scam. If something, the old phrase, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. And at the end of the day, how I always end conversations with people is, if you're questioning to yourself, should I call the police about this? I just don't know. Please call us. We want to hear from you. This affects all age groups, not just the elderly. Certainly, a large part is focused on our elderly community. that's something I mentioned to victims of scams too, that it's not just one age group. This is a wide swath of our entire population, and these scams are so complex and so intricate, and the people behind them unfortunately are pretty clever with some of the schemes that they come up with, and it's so easy to fall victim to some of these things, and it happens so quick. So like I said, if anyone's ever wondering, I just don't know about a situation, please call your local police department. We want to hear from you, and we can help.
Thank you for all those. There's so many things we get hit up with. I mean, the other day I got a letter in the mail from the IRS saying I owe them money, and yet there were big pocket holes that it's like, well, no, I actually got a refund last year, and stuff. And I kind of left it, but there's so many things that you don't know who to report them to. Are those things where even if you're not scammed, that you would advise calling the police department to let them know this is out there, just so you're alerted of what's possible?
Yes, absolutely. And that's part of it. We want to know what the latest trends are occurring in a community for the various different types of scams, because there's so many different scam schemes, and they change often. So we do want to know about that, and we can provide other resources of where you can make that report to, because it doesn't just fall on deaf ears, and what we learn from victims of scams gets passed along to other local agencies and federal agencies, so we can help to understand what trends are, and in some cases we're able to get some of the money back too.
So what can the police actually do? I mean, I would imagine there's a report that's filed, but what are the odds of getting funds recovered and things, and someone being prosecuted, found?
Right. Very good question. The unfortunate answer is it's an incredibly low solvability for scams, because the moment that the money gets sent over, whether it's a cryptocurrency, or you're providing a gift card, or it's an electronic funds transfer, the moment that it gets sent, that money is being distributed across numerous different accounts, and the biggest challenge that we face is that it doesn't stay local within that agency or that state. And to be quite frank, it's not just the United States. Like that money goes worldwide almost instantaneous, and that makes it very difficult to investigate, certainly from a local perspective, but even on a federal side too, when we see a lot of this money going over to China, for example, and we just can't fly over to China and continue to investigate a case. There's a lot of barriers there. So that's the unfortunate side, that a lot of these cases are very difficult to solve. It's not that we don't want to solve them, we absolutely do, but there's a lot of barriers there. That said, that's not all of the cases, and there absolutely are cases that stay within your state or within the country, and those cases are the ones where we see that we can get some of the possibility of getting some of the money back. And if I can just add on that too, is time is of big importance there, especially if we're going to try to recover some funds, because with each passing day, that money that may have gone to a bank account is being sent to other bank accounts and sent to other LLCs, and it just keeps getting diluted more and more. So that's why we want to educate people of, if something just seems off, please give us a call so we can walk through that case with them.
One thing I wanted to bring up, I was at a networking meeting yesterday, and I was talking with someone who has a foundation working with youth, and he really wants to start doing intergenerational stuff. And he said one of his reasons he wants to do that is he's seen a lot of young kids scamming our elders. Are you seeing that as a tick up?
I guess I wouldn't say specifically it's only kids doing this. I think from my experience, it's the analogy I kind of painted to is it's similar to be honest, like the drug cartel, where it's such an advanced organization, and the person that might be directly scamming the victim is just one small piece of a bigger organization. Certainly there are cases where you might have some youth or kids that are trying to, scam a certain person. From my experience, that cases that I've investigated, it's generally a more organized crime that is being laid out.
Okay, thank you. I want to ask you a quick question, and we're kind of tight on time, but I've heard about being a money mule, and that's a scam itself, and people are falling prey to that, and they don't know that they're really laundering money for companies. Can you just define that for people so that they can be aware of that? And that sounds like that is kind of this international beast out there that
Right.
is very well organized.
Right. That's absolutely very true. When you use the term money mule, it's a suspect is sending money that they've scammed from some other victim through to another victim who doesn't know it, and that victim is the money mule, who is then being directed to send the money to a different location. And they do this because it delays law enforcement's response of, if I get an initial complaint from a victim that, yep, I sent $100,000 to this bank account, and now I execute some search warrants and some subpoenas to find out who owns that bank account. And by the time I get those responses back and speak to that person, then I find out, oh, this is just yet another victim of this bigger case. And if you keep following where the money goes, that's where we can potentially get some of the money back. But the money keeps getting washed out by, like you said, these money mules.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And I want to give a shout out to Target. I actually had a friend who was who got scammed on the gift card thing, and Target caught it because she was literally in the store after the purchase calling in the numbers to the people, and she said she was surrounded by like 5 employees, and they like hang up the phone and stop that. And it was just nice to know that they understand this and they've got eyes and ears out there dealing with this too. So Lance, I'm going to throw it back to you, and again, Detective Weber, thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Before we go to Jay, I just want to follow up real quick, Detective Weber. Our friends who have been on the show with us previously, the Wayne County Sheriff's Department here in Michigan, which encompasses Detroit and a large amount of the suburbs, they sent us some good resources. And one of the biggest issues that Wayne County Sheriff's Department is facing, and I wanted to see if you had any thoughts on this or if you're experiencing this in your community, are people impersonating the Sheriff's Department. And they are going and targeting these seniors at their homes, looking like they're from the Sheriff's Department, telling them they have warrants and all these other things, and you pay us and we'll go away, otherwise we're taking you to jail. And this is quite an epidemic, and we have some links to that in our show notes on the article we'll post. But are you experiencing or know of anything like this in your area?
Yes, absolutely. The term you used, epidemic, is very accurate. This affects every single community throughout the entire country. Even in my smaller town of Roseville, this is a very common scam scheme that we see, of people claiming to be a law enforcement officer, that they have warrants out for their arrest. You must pay this or you will be arrested. And that's unfortunately a very common scam. And there's so many others, different scam schemes like that. But certainly that one with the suspect claiming to be some kind of authority figure and demanding money is a very common one.
So real quick to follow up on that. So if they show up at someone's door that's watching or listening to this or has loved ones that might be, fall victim to something like this, we're all saying, call the police. But if you think the police are at your door, how do you, as a civilian or a citizen, how do you differentiate if they're dressed in the proper attire? What do you recommend? What is the proper procedure for that?
Right. We will never, as law enforcement, whether it's city, state, or a federal agency, we will never call someone and first of all demand money. That's often where these scams go, is that you have a warrant for your arrest, you need to pay money in order to get. That is absolutely not how law enforcement business is done and ever will be done. We never demand money. From my experience in all the cases that I've ever had, I've never had someone show up to the victim's door dressed as a law enforcement officer. So I guess that would be the difference of there, is that if someone is outside of your door and they have a badge and they're claiming to be a law enforcement officer, that's a little bit different. And I guess even on that side, if you still don't believe them, hang up and dial 911 and say that someone's at my door claiming to be a law enforcement officer, to see if it's legitimate.
Okay. Thank you for that, Detective. Jay, we'll go to you next. Now, I know we're all paranoid, I think, these days, and I don't think, obviously, our seniors are probably the primary target of these scams, but I think all of us could be targeted with social media and, our digital age that we live in. But from a scammer's perspective, is it the most efficient and effective way for them to prey on people to get access to their accounts and other access, through the internet, or their assets, rather?
Well, it's efficient, just like it is with regular business, but there's a key point there about whether they're targeting your equipment or your software or your hardware versus targeting the individual that can provide information to access online accounts. So that's a piece of it. And it's what we call social engineering. But actually, I was pausing there because I wanted to address something you said right from the start, and that's about older versus younger people. And in fact, Detective Weber said that, it's really people of all ages who are being targeted. And I want to emphasize that because it's the Federal Trade Commission that collects data from hundreds and hundreds of law enforcement agencies and from nonprofit organizations like AARP, and they publish our best attempt to capture the extent of all this crime across the nation each year. And we've seen some huge increases across the board over the pandemic. In fact, if you compare 2019 to 2022, which is the latest year that we have the data for, it's a 366% increase in the amount of money reported lost to fraud. And again, this is across all hundreds of law enforcement agencies across the country. But also that same data shows that for people in the age group of 20 to 39, compared to people over the age of 70, we had over 2 times as many dollars reported lost to fraud from that younger age group. So it shows once and for all, this is not about cognitive decline. It's about vulnerability, and young people are vulnerable just the same as older people. So if there is some sort of a generational approach or just a way to educate people on those facts. I mean, it happened to my own stepdaughter who thought she was on her phone buying one thing, and it turned out it was just a fake website. So, for maybe a lot of younger people, it's the casual use of technology at their fingertips to make financial decisions. And for older people, it's a different type of vulnerability for some.
Sure. Well, and I know, and you're absolutely right, because I know someone this morning that I was speaking to, a good friend of mine, she was woken up at 3 a.m. in the morning by her Apple iPhone going off saying, her iCloud and her Apple ID had been hacked from Tripoli. And, her daughter shares the same Apple ID as her because her daughter's younger. And, she's been on the phone with Apple trying to get this resolved. I mean, I don't think scamming and these kind of things really, they don't put a face or an age to it. I think they're looking at what can we get, and they don't care how they can get it.
That's for sure. I think a lot before the pandemic, I think a lot of the misconception about older people being specifically targeted and victimized more than young people was, first of all, ageist. So that's what we're seeing. And second of all, it was about availability. So if a person's retired, if they're sitting at home and have access to the telephone and they're reading their emails, they're just more available to answer the phone or to respond to those scams. And as soon as I started working from home more often, I started seeing myself as being more available to have to make decisions and respond to all the scams I was seeing rather than just ignore them.
Right. Absolutely. So, Jay, let me ask you, How do you recommend that families protect their loved ones against these potential vulnerabilities in hopes of trying to prevent a scammer's attack?
Sure. Well, it's a big issue, and that has already been described and with advice from Grace and Detective Weber. So it's a real holistic approach. The isolation issue can't be understated. Our national call center that takes 1,000 reports of different scams every week, they have a national holiday that they recognize for when they always expect to get the most scam reports, and it's at Thanksgiving. And the reason for that is because adult children are coming home to visit their parents and they're finding out that there are scams going on. So I usually end my presentations with that encouragement for families is that we have to talk about money, even if it's not part of our culture, even if it's uncomfortable for families to talk about financial decisions. That's how we protect each other and avoid that type of isolation. But I'll take a step back and just talk about where I focus on advising families on these issues. I said in my introduction that understanding and knowing about specific scams is an important step in the process. And when we've seen almost 4 times increase in the amount of money lost, now's the time to spend a little bit of time of your time and energy to understand what's going on with all of these scams, whether it's Bitcoin ATM machines in gas stations, or whether it's gift cards, or whether it's other types of payment. But in addition to knowing about the scams, I encourage people to understand consumer protections and how we have very strong consumer protections on your bank accounts, on your credit card accounts, and on your investment accounts in this country. That's the reason that scammers want to be paid in cash. They want to be paid in gift cards. They want to be paid in cryptocurrency. Increasingly, they want to be paid with peer-to-peer payment apps because the financial industry is fighting against their liability for losses when those type of payments are utilized in a fraudulent way. So I'll start again with your legitimate, normal banking accounts, your credit accounts, and your investment accounts. My job and your job as a consumer is to monitor those accounts. And if you notice a transaction that you didn't authorize, you report it to the financial institution. And at that point, you've done your duty as an American citizen or a customer of these financial institutions in our country. And it becomes the bank's responsibility to investigate and somehow prove that the transaction was in fact authorized and they were not liable for the loss. For the majority of these type of transactions using debit cards, credit cards, personal checks, that's all the consumer needs to be concerned about, is reporting the unauthorized transaction to the financial institution. And then it becomes the bank's liability. So guess what? The financial institution has very sophisticated tools to automatically be monitoring all of those type of transactions going through their institution, and they flag them and stop them when that sophisticated system recognizes that could be fraudulent. Otherwise, the bank would be out even more money than they are from all of these scams today. But this is exactly why the scammers are demanding to be paid in gift cards. They want to be paid in cryptocurrency, which I pointed out. And often when I have the chance, I'll show people a map of the neighborhood where they live that shows all of these crypto ATMs that are popping up, because the consumer protections just haven't kept up with the technology. So we don't have rules that say anyone can investigate or seize money that's being illegally transferred through these ATM machines that are very accessible to people in their communities. Similarly, with wire transfers, those are still being utilized because the financial institutions don't have liability when that money is transferred to the wrong place based on the instructions of the victim who is trying to send it. And I'll explain quickly the whole issue with Venmo and Zelle and PayPal and other peer-to-peer payment apps, where essentially they are card transactions. Your credit card is in your Venmo account or your peer-to-peer app. And if you want to buy something off the internet, that's a good service to have, because in this sort of global retail economy, if you're buying something from a stranger on a website, you probably don't want them to see your card information. So that's where these peer-to-peer apps come in. But what has happened is the financial industry has decided they're going to fight back and say that they should not be responsible for fraudulent transactions taking place on these apps. So Congress is investigating, and they've asked the industry to report back on the extent of fraud being processed through their apps. But for right now, some banks, when a consumer calls and says, look, I didn't authorize this transaction, I was defrauded, the financial institution is fighting back on that. So in quick summary for folks, this is what I advise families and anyone is that you always pay with personal checks, credit card, debit card, and automatic bill pay. And like the detective said, whatever someone is asking you for a gift card, to pay with a peer-to-peer app, to go down to the payment station, aka the Bitcoin ATM machine at the gas station, or if they want to get paid with a wire transfer, I might have said cash. Those are the red flags to be looking for.
Right. When I know, just to touch back on the gift cards real quick, our company, we usually, part of our employees for their holiday bonuses, we also get them individual gifts, and usually they're gift cards to, Amazon, Target, something like that. In the last few years, Target, local grocery store, the place where you can buy the gift cards at, they will limit the amount of gift cards you can buy in one-time purchase, even though I'm buying it legitimately or the company's buying it legitimately. So now we're going to like 5 different stores, which to me, that looks suspicious, instead of just being able to go into one retailer and say, we need, 75 gift cards and explaining the purpose. But I'm okay with the inconvenience if it's protecting other people from, more nefarious reasons for the gift card purchases. Thank you so much, Jay. I want to go back to Lori.
Well, gosh, I'm just learning so much from each of you. It's just been fascinating. Jay, I loved when you brought up the holiday, with families coming and noticing. Again, it ties back into that loneliness or that disconnection we have, or that embarrassment that there could be an issue. And I'm going to shout out to a company called Careful. And they monitor, you can have kind of a safe circle, and they will monitor all of your accounts. So if you're overpaying, underpaying, suspicious activity, it'll go out to you as an individual. Again, you can use this at all ages, or if you're a care partner for somebody, you can have a safe circle there too. And those are becoming, I think, more popular and helpful with those. But boy, it can be difficult. I have a neighbor who has struggled, and she's at home, a lot. She lost her husband. We are running to the bank constantly, and I'm working with her son to try to protect her, because it seems like when you get on one list of a scammer, all of a sudden they're coming from a zillion different directions. Do you see that happen where they share lists?
Yeah, that's definitely the case. I call it sort of an ancillary industry within the way these organized criminals are working. Some of them might be actively targeting people over the phone or with emails. Others are just collecting data to sell to other criminal groups. So, and in fact, that's another interesting regulation in our country. People have this belief about their right to privacy, and that as if it is all encompassing. But a finer point is that if you provide your name and email address and personal information to an industry that isn't necessarily regulated, then they can sell it all they want. If their privacy policy does not say that they will not sell it, then they can if they want. But this, of course, excludes government agencies and the healthcare industry that have special regulations. But if you're just signing up for a prize or responding to some email on the internet because you might win something, then the whole purpose of those type of contests for some companies, legitimate or not, is to sell that information.
Okay, great. Well, Ken, I want to go to you next. You have been through this scam personally with your mom. And how did you find out as a family that something was off? I know you had mentioned earlier that your mom had dementia. But how did you find out that she was being scammed?
No, for sure. It's really interesting. And this is a really helpful conversation and I think resource for people, because I think in our family's case, you have to remember this is going back 14 years ago, right? So a lot of resources like this just didn't seem to be out there. Our mother was 63, really successful very highly educated high school guidance counselor and college admissions counselor, single mom, lived on her own, owned multiple homes. And we didn't know even what was going on with our mom health-wise, right? Back then, we just know what started presenting to us was that, for example, we'd be at lunch with our mom and her mobile phone would just be ringing off the hook. And she'd be very like panicked about it and almost needing to get up from the lunch table to go and accomplish some type of task that she didn't want to tell my brother and I about. We'd be at her house for, say, Thanksgiving, and her hard line, her home phone would be ringing off the hook. And, you know, it got to a point where my brother and I were talking, and again, single mom, right? We were like, my brother and I lived 2 hours away, and we were like, something's kind of not right. Something's going with mom. She seems really panicked these days. And what's with the cell phone and the hardline phone ringing off the hook? And what it led to was just us starting to kind of dig in and try to get information out of her. And I don't have like all the inside details, right? But from what we gathered was that they got their hooks into our mother online through the internet. And I don't know if it was gamified or how that all looked, and it seemed to be exactly what everyone here has touched on, that she almost ended up on some type of list. And what she would do was she'd get the call, she would go to her bank. And at the time, our mother was retired. So she was living off her education retirement. She'd take out a large sum of money, go up the street to the local grocery store and wire it through a walk-up window wiring service. And, you know, once that happens, it's gone. So, it was almost like my brother and I, some days we were almost chasing our tails, trying to navigate this and how to protect her. And I can share ultimately, if you want me to segue into that, what happened was, you know, it led to a series of things that, right, like with dementia, you start to kind of get your arms around the disease, eventually the car keys are going to have to go, right? Well, in our case, that was one of the things, but eventually, you know, after me changing her mobile phone number a number of times and her home phone number a number of times, I think our mom would just go back on the internet. And we're pretty confident too that in addition to it maybe being gamified, that there was also some threats going on, that she was going to had a warrant or something out for her arrest. And if she didn't pay this fee immediately, someone was going to come take her away. And again, it's at that point, we're trying to figure out what's going on with our amazing mother and her judgment issues. And it's like you're trying to duct tape holes in a boat, right? And it was just really, really difficult and really hard for us. And eventually, after a series of changing phone numbers, we eventually had to take her mobile phone away. And then eventually had to take her laptop computer away. And it just was a crazy, crazy situation. And, you know, it's conversations like this didn't exist. Internet resources didn't exist. There was no Instagram back then. Twitter was finding its footing, and so was Facebook. So it was kind of how, and it was also too, I was 35 at the time, you know. So my brother and I are really the tip of the spear with that whole sandwich generation term that you hear nowadays. So what we've just been trying to do, through Crossing Paths with Lori, is trying to share a bit about our story. But back then we were almost embarrassed, our amazing mother, what's going on? We need to protect her. And we're getting wind that what do you mean she can't pay her mortgage this month? What's going on? She's late on her HOA payment in her condo out in Palm Springs, what? So, hopefully I'm not rambling too much, but I'm really trying to like create a dotted line here that for families, like in our situation back then, it was like you're just trying to, plug all these holes in a ship that's potentially going down. And, we did reach out to law enforcement locally, and they were kind of like, well, once it hits that wire service, it's gone. We did go in and talk to the bank tellers. Fortunately, my mother's attorney, who like knew our family all these years, and wait, like a good decade before this happened, helped us navigate the process eventually of helping our mother with getting POA to protect her. So yeah, just a crazy journey. And just, our mother just passed away on Mother's Day this year, just a couple days after we celebrated her 76th birthday. So you can see like our mother was really young too, to be hit with this. And I think these conversations, and even a recent episode of 60 Minutes, right? And, like YouTube videos and things like that, that families can tap into now to like, oh my gosh, okay, that's kind of what's going on with my loved one. And, oh, I need to keep an eye out for that. And, oh, maybe I should call the wireless company and stop that down, and however that might look. So
yeah, it just kind of gets legs, once they get hit with this. Do you mind sharing how deep of a loss this was for your mom financially with all these scams?
Yeah, she ended up losing like all of her savings. And eventually like the house was repossessed to the bank. Yeah. So it was really tough on our family, and, of course, tough on our mother for sure. Yeah. So, it's real. Right. And, back then I think like it was almost like people didn't want to talk about it, but as the sandwich generation is really starting to walk this path with their loved ones, it's a conversation that's important. And, it seems to be more comfortable and like, unfortunately, really common. And I get like calls now from friends whose parents are in their like mid to late 70s that, they're saying, hey, this is kind of going on with my dad. Can I get some insight from you? And so, yeah, we're just trying to help others kind of like walk the path, as we always refer to it as,
Well, I really appreciate you sharing, your personal story. And it's kind of like a whack-a-mole machine. You bat one down and another one pops up. And I think a lot of times people don't understand how crazy it can get and how many different angles you can be attacked from, and that this really is kind of an organized crime in many, many cases. You're hearing now where they're taking titles of homes. And I mean, it's just gotten very, very sophisticated out there. It's nice that, bank tellers are being more educated in terms of how they can help protect things. But every bank and every teller is a little bit different, just like in any other business and stuff. That can be a little bit of a crapshoot, but I think it's come a long, long way in this. So again, thank you so much for sharing your story, and sorry that you lost your mom. I also want to point out, one of the things that we have in our resources, and it's just so poignantly done, is your mom's obit, and it talks about what a good woman she was and all the things she did for other people. And it gets back to that whole piece of, these guys don't care who you are, how good of a person you are,
Right.
They just don't care. And yet, you have built this legacy where you're still trying to give back with your mom, and have created a foundation to kind of keep on her legacy, even though everything was drained. And I just really applaud you for that. And again, thank you for sharing your story. Lance, I'm going to go ahead and throw it over to you.
Thank you, Lori, and thank you, Ken, for sharing that and your mom's story and legacy. I want to go to Jeffrey. And Jeff, we're hearing a lot about these scams, whether it's in person, knocking on the door, through the phone. But I have to imagine, and I could be wrong and you can correct me, that a lot of the scams come from online. And what form of scams comes through the internet or being online, and how can we tell exactly if it's a scam or if it's legitimate?
That's a very good question. And a lot of the things that the panelists have talked about are absolutely true. It is an organized crime, and it does originate from, it's important to understand where they come from. It's not an individual just reaching out to people's emails and trying to scam them into a misguided financial gain for themselves or trying to scam money. It's an organized crime in most cases online, and it comes in two different forms. It comes either in an email form or from a browser online where you get a pop-up sort of thing, and I'll talk about the different ones you can see there as well. But most of these originate from the dark web. And some of the things they touched on the panel is once you get on this list, it seems like you get more and more, because your email gets spread as, all right, we got a hit from this individual that they fell victim to a scam. So it now goes on the hit list that gets resold on the dark web to attack and vulnerable people that have fallen victim to a scam. And it becomes a higher price to buy these lists that are known targets that can be victims and give up money. So with that said, I'm going to pick up my notes here so I don't miss any of the different scams. But there's multiple different ones, and I just wanted to make sure I touched on the different ones for this topic. And I could go on for a couple of hours of the different scams. They definitely have grown, and we see multiple people in our office every week that have been scammed, and sometimes tens of thousands of dollars, and in tears, and how do I clean this up? And that's what we do, is help get their computer usable again, and hopefully drive that paranoia away that I'm not a victim, that I'm going to be a victim the rest of my life. You can clean it up, and you can be successful and go about your social media and enjoy, the benefits that there are online as well. So the first one are phishing scams, and phishing scams typically originate in work environments, but they also originate in residential and at home, where the phishing is really defined as phishing for information from you. So they may engage in a conversation and they'll ask information that could be targeting towards passwords that they could use to get into your accounts. Like, what's the name of your dog? What are your address? Any sort of personal information. Don't share, don't open up phishing emails that may ask for any personal information. Don't share any personal information with people that you don't know as a general practice. Ransomware is also one that's gone rampant. And a couple of years ago, ransomware used to be where they had some very smart individuals that would target businesses, and then they would worm their way into the network and eventually lock down their data, and then you'd get a pop-up and send us 10,000 Bitcoin and you'll get your data back. Otherwise, your business is shut down, basically. Well, a couple of years ago, it became a virus, a malware virus that is now for purchase on the dark web. And so you buy this kit with ransomware, malware, virus, and then you buy a list of how many emails you want, and you launch this ransomware to all of these emails, and then you just sit back and wait for people's data to be locked down and for them to call you to get their data unlocked. And it not only targets small businesses, it targets individuals now as well, whoever is on that email list. So ransomware is one of the most dangerous malwares that we see in our industry, in the IT industry today. And it's one that we're constantly battling. It's a war out there battling small businesses to protect them from being locked down with ransomware nowadays. And you see it on the news, Target industry, that just recently there's a hospital that got locked down. There's been entire cities of Houston that have been locked with ransomware and asked for thousands and thousands of dollars to get their money back, or millions in some cases. Another one is scareware. Scareware is really kind of a pop-ups, and it's more on your web browser. So it's things that you may click on something incidentally that you may not know, but it's interesting to you. You click on it. Not everything you see on the internet's safe. You click on it, and it'll shoot a pop-up in front of you. And it may come in the form of your computer has a malware, your computer has a virus, and it looks very legitimate. It may look like Norton, may look like McAfee, a very well-known antivirus program. But if they pop up, as a general rule, they pop up and they have an 800 number or any phone number on there to call, 99.9% of the time, that is a scam. So don't ever call anything that has a number on it. None of the legitimate companies will put a phone number to call, as a pop-up.
Can I just pop in real quick, Jeff? Just want to ask a quick question. Would having like a Malwarebytes or a Webroot or a Norton, having those anti-spamware or spyware and antivirus softwares on your computer, would that prevent you from becoming a victim? Or not necessarily?
So their purpose is really to eliminate spyware and malware that's downloaded from a payload on an email. So you say you open up an email that you don't know somebody's from, and it has a PDF, which is a very common format, document attachment. Those PDFs can be disguised with a program that will, as soon as you click on the email or you click on the PDF, it will download into the internals of your computer, and then it starts spying and collecting information and sending it back to whoever put that on there. That's what the antivirus, anti-spyware programs are really targeted, is to detect that and stop those type of things. Those pop-ups and the scarewares, they're not really effective on those because you did click on that, and so therefore it allows you to pop it up. But there are other tools just called pop-up blockers, and there's multiple. And Privacy Badger is one that we use a lot in our office. We'll load on people's browsers, and Privacy Badger is very safe. It's very legitimate. It's done a great job for us, and it blocks those type of pop-ups, so you don't even see them. And once you start using it, you'll realize that it's blocking tens and sometimes hundreds of pop-ups every time you click on something in the internet.
Okay, thank you.
There are also tech support scams, that may pop up, and it's very similar to the scare tactic scams, where the tech support scams, you may see a pop-up in your lower corner, and it's probably something that's already been loaded on your computer, that your computer has a malfunction. Call this service number, call Microsoft to help us get it resolved. Again, anything that has the number to call is illegitimate. Don't call it. Microsoft never puts their phone number on a pop-up. No Dell, no type of computer will send a pop-up with a number on it to call. So those are a common one that we see quite frequently. Fake antivirus software, that we talked about a little bit there. Fake online shopping websites, which is a very common one. I think Detective Weber, mentioned that one just a little bit, where around shopping season, Thanksgiving, Christmas, you see a lot of fake websites, and they're just trying to get you to click on there. What they're looking for is to enter their credit card number so they can capture that and start using it in other areas, right? So generally speaking, the way to identify a legitimate website from an unlegitimate website is if you look in the upper left-hand corner, there's always a padlock on that address line. So if you go to Target, they will have a padlock in that address line. That means it is a secure and trusted website. And you can even click on that padlock and it'll tell you the security information about it. Fake job opportunities are things that pop up. Social media scams, Facebook and so forth. And this is one, that probably really targets, the lonely people looking for connections. And those are something that we don't see nearly as frequently, but get in trouble on your Facebook or Twitter account or something like that. Online dating scams also falls into that target. And then investment scams. So you may see a pop-up or you may get an email for an investment scam. We're looking for investors in the early stage of our business. I think most people are probably aware of those nowadays, but they still happen. It's amazing that people are still successful with putting those out. And here's a final one I'll leave you with, is the refund scam. So people that get scammed and they may lose a few $1,000s, and now they're on this list of vulnerable targets to be scammed. They'll get an additional scam that's called a refund scam, and they call up the individual because they've already talked to them, they've got their information, and say, hey, we realize you've been scammed. We've tracked them down, we've identified it. We want to refund your money. Could you please give us your bank account information so we could refund that money back to you? Well, guess what? They pull more money out of the bank account, and you're deeper in debt and deeper down that hole. So those are really the type of scams that we see, and they're coming up with new ones every day, unfortunately.
Well, I know probably about 8-9 years ago, my wife and I, we were at Best Buy buying a computer, ironically enough, and maybe 20-30 minutes in the store, my mother-in-law calls my wife and was asking her a couple of questions. She was on the other line with Microsoft technical support. Now, is anybody here familiar with that scam? And it was someone overseas. How they got her phone number, we'll never know. And they said, ma'am, we're from Microsoft. You have viruses on your computer. We will remote in and we will clean up the computer for you. Well, by the time we got into the phone call with her, she was already $600 in the hole that she had paid them. And we immediately went over there because, now my mother-in-law was terrified because they had her bank information and all this. And we said, she doesn't need the service. We'll take care of it. Thank you. We called the bank, and the bank said because they actually performed a service on her computer, albeit like emptying the trash can or the recycling bin, that they could keep the $600, but the other $600 that she had paid, they had froze it and reversed it to her. But that's one of the ones I am myself personally is most familiar with are these, third world countries, whatever it is, they're calling and saying, we're from Microsoft, we're from this place, you have these viruses. And my understanding is because they're overseas, it makes it very, very difficult to reverse the transaction once you've already committed to it. Are you familiar with this scam?
Yeah, absolutely. And most of those scams do originate from 3 countries that we see anyway. It's India, China, or Russia.
Okay.
Yeah, that Microsoft scam is a very common one that we see. The danger of that is as soon as you call them and you allow them on your computer, they've probably downloaded spyware and tools that will watch your computer. They start downloading the information in your financial institutions, the logins, and so forth. And the longer you let that go, the deeper and deeper you get in that victim.
Yeah. So my question for you, Jeff, is for us and for those listening and watching, what should they do if they fall victim to the scam on their computer?
So the very first thing is don't be embarrassed about it. It happens to so many very intelligent people. And it's not an age thing. We see people of all ages, come into our office and they fall victim to the scam. The longer you wait to report it and do something about it, the deeper and more danger and the more trouble you can get into with it. So if you recognize at any point when you recognize you're being scammed online with your computer, shut your computer off, just power it off completely, pull the plug out of the wall, whatever it takes to get that thing disconnected from the internet and power it off, because they can't do any damage if it's off, right? So get that powered down and bring it into a computer professional as soon as you get availability to have them run scanning tools on it, clean up all those things. And sometimes the best way to do that is we entirely reload the entire computer just to be safe, to make sure there's no underlying issues there. But we've seen a amazing statistic that I put together for this presentation is over a 2,000% increase in scams of people coming into our office over the last 5 years. 2,000% increase in the last 5 years. And their tactics are becoming more sophisticated all the time. They're becoming very belligerent with the individuals that they're talking with. They argue, they fight, and they start yelling at them, and they get fearsome, and so they give in and pay their money, which is just terrible. Once your computer is shut off, make sure you get it to your individual. And then the next thing you should do is call your bank or financial institution, as well as your credit card companies that you gave access through your computer, and ask them to alert you of any additional charges that come across, and reverse any charges that are fraudulent that you've already given to them. Change your passwords is another big tip that I can give you. Change your password to your bank account, change your password to your investment, change your password to your computer, change your password to your email. The passwords are still some of the best protection that you have against intruders getting into your accounts. Make sure they're strong passwords. I know nobody likes doing the uppercase, lowercase, special characters, but it is truly the best protection you have individually. And then along with the, Detective Weber, and I believe Jay mentioned as well, report the scam to the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, because they do really want to know. By reporting to the FTC, it builds cases against the scammers, it identifies trends, and it also helps educate the public on how much is really going on. And statistics I've heard, I don't really have valid, information to back this, but roughly 3 to 5% are all that report their scams. The other 95% just are too embarrassed to talk about it, and they walk away and lesson learned and don't tell anybody about it. Another tip is monitor your credit. So whatever method you use, whether it's Experian or other, third-party tool, keep an eye on your credit reports to make sure no fraudulent activity occurs, such as unauthorized opening new credit cards or major purchases, and then contact your local authorities just to report it. Because if you report it fast enough, and if it's something local, you may have an opportunity that could be recovered. But if you don't report it, it'll never be recovered. So the important thing I can say is just don't wait too long. Act quickly and disconnect from the internet.
I agree with that. And, nowadays mobile devices and tablets are kind of a really big deal for a lot of people, even, for seniors and young people alike. Is there any extra risk? Because you hear information about, well, you can't get a virus on your cell phone or on your tablet, and Apple's foolproof. Do you have any advice for people who may use those devices primarily for their internet use?
It used to be true, and Apple has caught up pace with Microsoft in the recent 5 years, where they're really outpacing the malware and infections that Microsoft, has gotten in the past. So Apple still gets viruses. Apple, does they are victims and susceptible as much as Microsoft anymore. Your cell phone does have a bit more protection for some reason or another that I don't understand. Cell phones are much more protected and less targeted by scammers, online scammers, than your computers, whether it's an Apple or a Microsoft product.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, Jeff, for people who are watching this, and you're probably familiar with like the free antivirus you can use off the internet, like Avast and things like that. Is that recommended?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's nothing wrong with that. Just make sure it's a brand name. Avast is a good one. Malwarebytes is another good one. But if you want to go the extra mile, it only costs you $3 to $5 per month for a little heavier duty malware protection, such as WebRoot or something of that nature. But your computer, if you have a Microsoft computer, it comes with Windows Defender, and then Windows Defender is rated in the top 10 best antivirus. But however, when you look at antivirus programs, they're looking for signatures of what could infect your computer, and it's kind of like a slice of Swiss cheese. They can only do so much, so they're probably 94% effective. So if you add another antivirus on top of that, as Avast or WebRoot or something like that, you're putting another slice over that that Swiss cheese with the holes, and now you're closer to protecting 100%. So some people say, well, why not add 3 or 4? Well, every time you add that, it creates more confusion to your computer and takes cycles out of your computer. So I don't really recommend more than the antivirus that comes with it, Windows Defender, and 1 more. Add more than that, and they're gonna start butting heads, and it'll be counterproductive. But absolutely, add 1 more on top of the Windows Defender or whatever your computer comes with.
Okay, thank you. And just last question before I throw it back to Lori. One of our families actually recently, they belong to a travel club. It's a very well-known national brand organization. I won't name them, but they were notified a couple months ago that their corporation was hacked and was a victim of spam or spyware, and the family was concerned: are they at risk now because they their information with the company was potentially exposed? What advice would you give a family like that if somewhere they do business with gets hacked or falls victim to something like this? Do they need to do any steps on their end, on their computer, or should they just keep a close eye on things, monitor their credit, or should they take steps immediately?
Well, one of the most immediate things you can do, back to the password advice, if you believe that you could have been hacked or could have been compromised, change your password. It never hurts to change your password, and it's still the best protection. But you can believe it, especially the large national chains. They've spent millions and billions, depending on the size of the company, on their security and protection, because that's their business, right? They don't want your information to get compromised any more than you do, because it could end their business. So they do have protection. They're doing the best they can, generally speaking. What you can do for yourself besides change your password is monitor your credit. Just keep an eye on those things for anything suspicious of new credit cards being open or large major purchases happening to you fraudulently.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. Lori?
Oh gosh, Jeff, I could ask you a million things because there's so many with all of you guys. There's so many different types of scams out there, but I'm going to hold because I want to make sure we get John in here. John, your tenacity, I know John personally, and his tenacity to tangle with this man or a friend of his is really something. And so I wanted to make sure that we heard John's story and how he tackles these things, because boy, and I don't want to make this a challenge out there on the internet to get this man, but I sure wouldn't want to be on the other side of the stick, who's poking you, because you really stand up for your rights and go after injustice. So you had a couple of different situations. One was a little bit different than some of the scams we're talking about, but it really was in terms of changes in terms of your contract, in terms of where you lived. And I'll let you tell your story because you can do it way better than I can.
I've lived in senior housing for 19 years now. And so just as a premise, I have had so many of my friends, and fortunately, many times they've talked to me about it ahead of time and alerted me, and I shared that they were being victims of scams, but many of my friends got beat. But I've seen a couple of low-tech scams, and the one that you're referring to happened in COVID. My wife was in memory care, and she got to the point where she wouldn't take her pills. She'd spit them out. It wasn't she couldn't swallow them. And so the natural thing to do is crush them and put them in fruit or applesauce or pudding. And a year later, COVID hit. Now, they've been doing this all this while, so obviously they've ratified it as that is a standard practice. And they're grasping for resources. And so they, oh, John, we're sorry, we won't back charge you, but we failed to charge you for special medication. And so we fought that, and we were at an impasse. I refused to pay it because, number one, they ratified it by doing it. Number two, it was listed nowhere in the extra charge list for that service of crushing pills. And we were really at a crossroad. And Lori, you came up with the solution. Otherwise, I don't know what would have happened. But she sent me a link to the Attorney General in the state of Michigan had cited some 100 nursing homes ceases and desist for that type of practice. And I downloaded that onto my iPad, that video. And at our next meeting, I just asked them if they would be kind enough to let me show them a video before we talk. And the upshot of it was both parties gained. I was able to I had unlimited access to her then because I agreed to give her medication. And they gained because I'm doing work that they're getting paid for. But that's a low-tech scam. But
that was a few $100s a month more they wanted to crush these pills. And so it was a substantial amount.
That's fault. I told them, I said, I'm very fond of both of you, but if I had to make my choice between $3,000 and your friendship, I would take the former. And we're good friends now.
So, well, thank you for sharing that. The other one just recently happened with a friend of yours, where she actually went into a store and purchased some products. So why don't you tell us about that and how you helped her handle that situation?
Yeah, that was another low-tech scam. It was exploiting, I think, vulnerable adults. My friend went into a place that sells soaps and cosmetics thinking she would buy just some soap and see if it would help. And a very aggressive salesperson just started putting stuff on her face. And the upshot of it, she was very uncomfortable. She wanted to get out of it. And she's terribly embarrassed by it because she was a victim. So she agreed to purchase something she thought was about $35. She got home and she found that she had 4 boxes in her thing. $750. She immediately returned. They said, oh, we have a no return policy. And then so we go to the credit card company, and after correspondence back and forth, the credit card company said, well, because of no return policy, we can't do it. And I took pictures in there. There are no signs anywhere about all sales final. And later we learned that the credit card, and I didn't know it at the time, the credit card company had based their decision on something the merchant submitted, which were fake signatures. My friend has a tremor, and when she signs her full name, but takes both hands like this. These fake invoices that had no return on them had scratches like that. So obviously they're a thing. And so when that failed, we filed a claim in small conciliation court against the merchant. And the courts must be very busy because we filed it in March. Our court date was July 3rd. We did the hearing on Zoom. His Honor wasn't in a robe, he's in a sweatshirt. And we thought he was bored, but I think he probably had already made his decision based on what we'd submitted. A month later, we get a judgment. Now, how do you collect on the judgment? Anticipating that they wouldn't pay, I wrote a document that I handed to them when they refused to pay, and essentially suggested 4 points. Number one, all they would be out is the margin on the sale. Number two, that even if they appeal, they'll spend $300 an hour on attorney's fees. They might as well give her back her money. Number three, that after the appeal was over, if she doesn't have her money, she would have to use any resource available to her. And she has no intention of disrupting their business, but she would issue a writ of execution to the sheriff and seize assets to be sold for payment. 2 days before the deadline of the appeal, we got a call and they wired money into my account because I was the SOB that was giving them fits. But I thought it'd be funny, and we got all of our money and the court costs. But I thought it'd be funny to have maybe some of her attorney called up and say, I understand you gave money to John Sweeney. that rightfully belonged to this lady, and he's left town.
So were you nervous giving them your bank information? I would have been.
Well, I didn't give them the bank information. They did it by Zelle, and they didn't see it.
Oh,
And
okay.
I think the reason they did that because they didn't want me to see their bank information by writing a check. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, interesting. Well, it was interesting, in talking about this where, you lined up so much proof when you were working with this, and you had visibly shown twice where they signed forms that were fraudulent, and they weren't even the same. I mean, and one of
The
the
interesting thing, she signed one time,
Mhm.
but there were two signatures.
Yep. So yeah, so it was really interesting, but I appreciate the tenacity of going after this, because a lot of people will just let it slide because it is very time consuming and it's emotionally draining. To pull all of this stuff together. So I want to thank you for sharing those couple of scams there. Lance, I'm going to go
Into
ahead.
the hearing, I was just going to share with you. She was very nervous about it. My dear, what are you nervous about? You've already lost the money.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, it is. It's a big thing, and then to go public with it, there's that ego, and how did I fall for that type deal? And I mean, it shouldn't even fall for it. I mean, it was just
This is
done
a
behind the scenes.
master's in psychology.
Yeah.
He's most embarrassed by getting zinged, but we've all done. I've been burned a few times in my 94 years.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Lance, did you want to go ahead and
Yeah.
up here?
Yeah, thank you. First and foremost, I just want to say thank you again to each of you for taking time out of your day today to take part in this conversation, and an important conversation at that, and share these resources and information. I want to open it up to see if anybody had any feedback, questions, or additional comments they wanted to add to it. And before I do, though, I just wanted to ask one quick question to Jeff that I just was thinking about as I was listening to John. TikTok, yes or no for the United States?
No.
Okay. And can you
And
explain?
that's all I'll say about that.
Okay, that's okay. Fair enough.
It's a foreign, unsupported, entity that I don't support personally.
Okay, so I have young kids. They don't have social media. I don't know if I'll even let them have social media. I don't personally use TikTok, nor does our business, but it just seems like every day, it seems like in the news, there's somebody, from DC saying, get it off your phone. And I've seen other countries have banned it. But yet it's one of the hottest, most popular social apps, it seems, for the country. And I just didn't know if you would advise for or against it, but you advise against it. That's good enough for me.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeff. Does anybody have any additional comments or feedback or things they want to add to the conversation? Yeah. Ken.
Don't mess with John. That's what I want to add. I wish we had crossed paths with him when we were going through kind of something similar with our mother. Yeah, no, for sure. And I think something I failed to touch on too, that I wanted to mention too, that and I'm not going to say who it was, but for the in-store wire service grocery store, I actually contacted them to try to bridge that gap and say, this is our mother. This is what's going on at this particular store. Don't accept any cash from her. It didn't work, because they get their transaction fee and all that. So, it's real. It's going on out there. And through conversations like this, hopefully it's a resource to protect your loved ones going forward,
Right. Absolutely. And I just want to mention too, to Grace, she let us off today, talking about the additional risk and exposure to our seniors and those dealing with loneliness and isolation. But we also, Grace, we're hearing about the risk to going online to try to stay connected and engaged. How do you kind of quantify both of those things? We want to encourage our loved ones who may not be online to maybe get online and join a support group, or keep in touch with long distance relatives, or high school friends or childhood friends. but there's a big risk associated with that too, right? I mean, because if they're not well versed in using social media or using the internet, and we're giving them the internet or a computer now to get engaged with, and they're not familiar with it, what steps should they take, Grace, to make sure that their loved ones know the dangers? And maybe Jeff can chime in on this too, because I do see there are great benefits to the internet and to social media, but there's also a very dark, vulnerable side to it that can really take advantage of people and lead to further damages and harm to themselves or their family members.
It's an interesting question because when you think about, what helps people feel connected, like when you look at the social science, what helps people feel connected, what helps them build empathy with others, the research on social media is really mixed, not even just within the context of scams, but even more broadly than that. And I'm sure, many of you are familiar, like the last election cycle, there were tons of stories in national media about families that became estranged because they were alarmed to find out this, that, and the other about their relatives. So I think social media has some opportunities, particularly sort of those more educational ones, in the same way that, the fact that you could watch C-SPAN, or you could get access to news or information or how-tos that you don't have otherwise. But maybe this makes me old school, but I think there's something to that in-person connection that helps both with sort of peer-to-peer learning and sort of looking out for each other. And I'm thinking about what Jay said earlier about, people of all ages are dealing with scams. And a lot of even at work, I get spoofed emails, and I'm one of those, okay, it's 7:00 on a Friday, see you Monday, So that's the only reason why my team has ever even known that it wasn't me, because I would never tell them to call me at 10:00 on a Friday to give me a gift card. But, very sophisticated digital scams. And I think that's where recognizing, it's important to question, it's important to have conversations about that. It's important to sort of stay abreast of what's happening with local news or national news, because that's where a lot of information is disseminated about scams. I have to laugh because my dad, who is in his mid 60s, just retired. He doesn't listen to her music, but he's become a huge fan of Taylor Swift because Taylor Swift asked some really critical questions about a crypto scam, and now has been helping to educate people about avoiding this, scam. And so my dad, every time, Taylor Swift comes out, he's like, oh, she's so smart. It's so great that she did that. And I think that's part of it too, is just that sort of critical thinking piece. And just media literacy in general is really important. Not that social media is bad. It's just, it really needs its own time and place.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Jay, you had your hand up?
Yeah, thanks. And I think Grace came around there toward the end, just acknowledging how important that having internet connection is for people of all ages, including the older adults right now. And our country is responding. So the Infrastructure and Jobs Act those funds are coming to state governments right now, and in Minnesota and elsewhere, state governments are making plans on how to deploy millions and millions of dollars to increase the infrastructure, so getting the internet connection to people's homes and businesses. But also in these funds are funds for training programs and funds to get devices into people's hands. So there are dozens and dozens of examples about during the pandemic and afterward that we just need to rely on internet, high-speed internet connections to live in our society, in our country, the way things are today. And if older people are being left behind, that is not just because there are risks and rewards that come along with it. We need to train people up and get people to be able to use the internet safely, so that, for lack of a better analogy, so that just folks aren't left behind and left out.
Right. Thank you. Lori?
I wanted to go ahead and pull Jeff in, because I see you've got your hand up there too.
I was just going to, talk a lot of what Jay just mentioned as well. It's hard to get away from the internet and online social media nowadays. Even your financial institution, a lot of your bills and things come over the internet. A lot of them try to discourage you to get paper mail nowadays, or paper billings, and pay your invoices online, do your financial things online. So it's almost unavoidable. I don't want to scare people to the point where that they don't want to use it and they walk away from it. It makes their life more difficult because it's just much more of a challenge. The social media does have its place, but I would agree with Grace as well. I'm kind of old school myself. I think there's more benefit having the face-to-face conversations, a handshake, and seeing people personally. But there's a place for the social media and Facebook. As far as, people are much more mobile today than they used to be. And the Facebook keeps them in touch with those long distance grandchildren and children in other states that you don't necessarily see, but you can keep up what they're doing. They'll post what they did online, or what they did, in school today, or a baseball game, what have you. I think that's a very healthy opportunity for social media. But the caution, I would say, don't friend just everyone that wants to be your friend on social media. Only connect with the people that you truly know and want to be friends with. If you wouldn't want to be friends with them and shake their hand and have a meal with them, then you probably shouldn't be a friend with them on social media as well, would be my advice.
I think that's good advice. I had someone reach out to me the other day through Instagram and said, oh, I have this clothing store. I'd like you to see if you'd be interested in reviewing it as an influencer, yada, yada, yada. And I said, well, I'm not finding the website. Oh, no, give me your phone number and I'll add you to the group. And I'm like, no, you are not getting my phone number at all. And and I've had scammers call too on that whole phone number thing, where they have taken over actually the phone, and it shows that they are my XL Energy company. It'll pop up with their name, but they're total scammers. So it's just so many different directions. Jeff, I did want to ask you one thing though, because I'm still paranoid of this. A lot of people save their passwords in different forms. Some people put it in a document. Some people carry around a little book. Some people, have it in these little keys. What do you recommend to save your passwords? I mean, everybody's getting hacked. So I'm personally don't really want to put all my passwords in one place in case they get hacked.
So that is an excellent question, and one that we're asked many times. I wish I had the perfect answer. I don't. And I've done tons of research on that. There are many different methods to storing your password. Just make sure that it's secure. There are password vaults, as one that you mentioned, where they'll save your password. Google's, a well-known one. Google will ask you when you enter your credentials to log into a website, do you want us to save your password? Google is probably one of the save. Google Chrome would be one that I would be comfortable with saving. Just make sure that you're using a safe password to get into your Google Chrome account. And don't lose your Google Chrome account credentials, because if you lose that, basically you're losing all of your passwords and you're going to have to start from scratch again. So there are many password vaults. Use a large name like, Google Chrome, LastPass. There are multiple ones out there that that's their business, that they take care of your passwords. And the benefit to that is it allows you to create those large combination passwords where it has uppercase, lowercase, numbers, special characters, and you don't have to remember it, right? You come up to that page again and it automatically fills it in, or it gives you the information to fill it in. And that way you have those unique passwords that are very secure. What you don't want to do on passwords is use the same password for multiple different sites, because if someone were to access that password, guess what? Now they've got access to 5, 10, whatever sites that you have that you use that password for login. So I would strongly, discourage that. My wife, she puts hers in a little book that she carries with her all the time. I'll tell you what, nobody's hacked that because it's always with her in her purse. And until it gets stolen, that's going to be an issue. But I don't know that there's a perfect solution for it yet, Lori. That's a very good question.
Okay, thank you. Ryan, I wanted to see if you had anything to add. I know I've learned a ton today, and there's been so many. I'm just almost overwhelmed at the types of scams. I mean, it's like limitless, and there's new ones popping up all the time.
Yeah, there really are. One that we've seen recently, just with the advancement of AI technology, is I think maybe most of us have heard of the grandparent scam before, where someone gets called saying, "Hey, your granddaughter's in trouble. We need money." The advancement on that scam that we've seen is, again, with AI technology, is scammers find let's just use that granddaughter again as an example, her voice on Facebook, like a publicly shared video on Facebook, and they can take her voice in a video that's on a Facebook account, capture it within the AI technology, now call grandma or grandpa, and the voice that is being projected through the phone is the granddaughter's voice, and it might say, "Grandma, help, I'm hurt." So it's a very hard thing for anyone to just easily hang up on that when it sounds exactly like your grandkid that is saying that they're hurt and that they need help, and someone's threatening that you need to send money. So with each passing day and year, I mean, the scams just get more complex and harder to easily identify as a scam.
I'm so glad you brought up the AI, because that is, I think that's going to be an up and coming one. And I think it's going to be much harder to control too. John, did you have your hand raised? I thought I saw your hand raised.
I was just going to share a technique that I use because we hear of all of these scams, and the earlier you detect them, the better. Have a very simple, my bank, and I think it's available to any bank, I have it set where the minute a charge is made over my threshold, I get an instant notice of it. And twice I have uncovered scams that I was able to act immediately on. And in my case, it also pops up on my watch.
Wonderful. That's a good point. Jay, I had one last question I wanted to ask you. I know you guys do a ton of education. Do you have a program? Because I think there's such stigma at all ages with this. And I know parents and grandparents are paranoid about the kids getting scammed. And, we want to protect our elders, the whole 9 yards. Do you have a program that says, that's really focused for the family to say everyone is vulnerable? And because I think sometimes when we talk to our kids and grandkids, they think we're looking down at them and we're better and we figured this all out, and let them know this can happen to any of us. They're just going to target us a little bit different. And I'm just wondering if there's any, I haven't seen any education out there like that. Maybe it's there and I just don't know.
No, but I made a note to myself that when this is published, it will be shared at our senior facility here. And I think because this is very educational, and I think any senior facility should have this blog available for people to see and hear these scams.
Okay, great. Thank you, John. Jay, how about you with your organization? Do you do any of that type of education, or have you seen that out there?
Yeah, in pieces and parts, specifically about how families can work together on these issues. But I'll tell you, when my volunteers that I work with and myself are speaking with groups, it's the other side of that coin I was describing earlier, where adult children come home for Thanksgiving and find out that mom and dad are being victimized. But instead, in our presentations, whether it's at a place like where John lives or other audiences, wherever we can find them, that's what we're trying to do, is empower people, the older folks who are listening to this information and concerned about it. when they go home for Thanksgiving, they can talk to the young kids about it. They can talk to everyone. So we encourage people and empower them to be fraud fighters and spread the word. And on one hand, that's useful and helpful. On the other hand, it's a great way to get people's attention because no one wants to listen about how they are going to be the next victim and they should be scared and they should shut down the computer once and for all and never learn how to use one. Instead, get some education and you can be a leader within your family on helping people stay cautious. I mean, with our elders today, and even in my generation, when we go on vacation, we put the lights on timer and have a neighbor pick up our mail for us because we don't want anyone to know we're not at home. And the opposite is true for younger people. So I think that's an easy way that older folks and families can get involved and help younger people learn too how to be safe.
Okay, thank you. John, you had a comment?
I had mentioned before that I've had a number of my friends share problems or raise a question. And if I tell them it's a scam, sometimes they absolutely will not believe it because the reward is so great. And what I've done in those, there was 3 cases specifically that I remember, I've talked to the management and had them contact the families and alert them that mom is about to be scammed.
Good. It's nice to have good friends out there. That's for sure. Ken, I want to just ask you one thing because, your scam you said was, like 14 years ago. Has this conversation helped you, empowered you, make you feel better that more people are going to be protected, that there's more things available?
Definitely. Absolutely. For sure. Just even the conversation is super helpful and should be definitely a great resource for people. And I just was thinking too, if it's helpful for people too, right? Like things like 2-factor authentication is becoming more common to log into your computer. That can be a resource. And I think for the AI phone scams, because I saw that episode of 60 Minutes and I thought, well, how could families maybe navigate that? And again, just throwing it out there, maybe there's some type of emergency password that families can incorporate if it's a true emergency when they call a loved one. The recipient of the phone call can say something like, what's the word? And then they all are aligned to know what it might be, right? Again, for what it's worth. But this has been super helpful for sure. And I think it'd be great for other people that are walking the path for sure.
Wonderful. Well, in wrapping up, I want to ask each of you just for one last thought. And what positive things have you seen occur, over the years, when it comes to scams and seniors? And Jeff, I'm going to go to you first.
So the positive I would say is, don't take this the wrong way. The positive is that scams have become more sophisticated, which is also a negative, right? So it means that the traditional scams aren't working that used to work. Those are a win. So the education is working. We just need to keep up with the education on the new scams, keep people in front of those to prevent them from being hacked and victim to the scams.
Great. Thank you. Ryan, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I would echo that the education is working. While the dollar loss that we're seeing, that this affects is growing with each passing year. We're also seeing the number of reported scams, especially from our elderly community, is actually going down. Hopefully that's a sign that there's less total number of victims. I think in the last year or two, it's down about 20%. So I think that education piece is working, that people are aware of some of these scams going out there and reporting it if they do fall victim to it.
Thank you. Jay?
Yeah, thanks. We definitely need our regulations on to keep pace with the advances in technology, and we can't leave individuals out hanging to dry when scammers are victimizing people. And then I'll just reiterate that if folks can just go out of their way to have a conversation with the people that they care about and trust about financial decisions, then we'll all be better protected.
Thank you. John?
I was just thinking, one of the things that appealed to me about memory care for my wife rather than nursing home is by law, the staff are required to be educated in dementia awareness. It would seem to me that it would be well to have a law or a statute that any staff in a assisted living facility be educated in scam alerts. I just think that would be very beneficial because they see the people, they talk to them, they'll confess to their friends.
What a great idea! That is really smart. Ken, how about you? Any positive thing that you'd like to say or make a comment to?
You guys are all awesome for sure, and this is a really helpful resource for families. Yeah, for sure. That's really all. Yeah, definitely. It's been a great experience. Thank you guys.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Grace, how about you?
I would just say the fact that we're able to talk about it and there are so many solutions, the fact that government is responding when government is usually very reactive, but they're putting regulations out there and they're setting the stage, and even private companies are, creating new tools. I think there's a lot to be optimistic about. And I think probably the piece that brings me the most hope is this changing conversation about what it means to get older. And instead of assuming that because someone's older, they're not using social media or they don't have the ability to do this, that, and the other, really recognizing that this is more about vulnerability and issues that impact all of us. And we're all in it together in terms of protecting ourselves from scammers and other types of criminals. So it's just been a wonderful conversation, and I'm so happy to have been a part of it.
Great. Thank you. Lance, you want to go ahead and wrap up?
Yeah, real quick, I just want to thank everyone again for their time today, their service, and their expertise. And one thing I just want to touch on real briefly to kind of piggyback off of Grace is I think it's helpful for our seniors to know this isn't just a senior issue, that it affects everybody of every age, so that they don't feel embarrassed or ashamed to have to go to a family member and say, you're not going to believe what I did, because I think there's a lot of issues attached to that as well, whether it could be their driving or living alone or whatever it may be. And I just think continuing to have this conversation and discussion and raising the awareness to the issue will just help all of us.
Wonderful. And again, I have learned so much, and I appreciate all of your dedication and time to share and pull this conversation out of the closet, into our living rooms, dining rooms, and, coffee clutches. I think it's really important. There's so much to share, and we can learn from one another's experiences and really try to head this off. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Conscious Caregiving with L&L, where we're tackling the tough conversations. We look forward to seeing you again next month.